everyone. It is truly an honor to be on the stage with John. It's our careers crisscrossed at NBC News. So thank you for having me this morning. I want to talk about, since the session is unraveling, my view as a physician. And what I'm going to say today, not everyone in this room is going to agree with, and that's okay. Today, I want to give you a sort of first-person belief in where we are, where we're going, what's wrong, and frankly, how I see the world. And I can't tell you how I see the world if I don't bring with it every single bias that there is. So let me start by telling you that I am consumed by death and dying. That's all I think about. I turned 60 a year and a half ago, and so I am in the third of my life. So I keep thinking, what am I going to do of significance in the third of my life? I mean, the first part of my life really was dedicated to being a physician, even though I still describe myself as a physician. But I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'm the daughter of an ear, nose, and throat physician. I'm the granddaughter of a neurologist. I knew since third grade I would be a doctor. So there were never any decisions to be made. When people said, well, what's next? It's, well, there's more school. Well, then what's next? Well, then there's my residency. Well, then what's next? Well, there's an academic appointment. So life was very much like this. And I remember when someone said to me in college, I went to Indiana University, well, what happens if you don't get into medical school? And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, you know, not everybody gets in. I was like, seriously? So there was this aha moment where then I drove to Indianapolis to interview with Eli Lilly to be a microbiologist as my plan B, since I haven't gone through life with many plan Bs, which explains a lot. And got my job as a microbiologist and then got into medicine and went on. And then I had this accidental interaction with a film crew during my residency. I did pediatrics first, and then I did ear, nose, and throat surgery at the University of Pittsburgh. And I was doing a tonsillectomy at the University of Pittsburgh, and a television crew came in and asked, you know, some questions about tonsils, and I ended up talking, and the television crew said, you know, you're not bad. Have you ever considered doing television? And the answer was obviously no. And accidental things happened. I went to the University of Arkansas for my first real academic job, started doing television, and went to work for ABC News for 17 years as a correspondent for primarily Good Morning America and World News Tonight. So those were the two thirds of my life. And I've been able to keep those lives on these parallel tracks when they interact, when I've sort of deemed them so. And it's worked well because I always had a West Coast life. I was on staff at UC San Francisco for a gazillion years, while my television life, my broadcasting life, was primarily East Coast centered. So I always saw myself as a physician first, then a broadcaster, but there are times when those lives really became intimately related. But I always saw myself as a doc first. And now I'm 60, I'm 61, and I stepped out of the operating room last year because I think doctors, and particularly surgeons, are very bad at knowing when it's time to step back and change one's course. So I now teach young medical students and young surgeons how to be human beings, which is a much harder job than cutting people open. But that's my job at the University of Pennsylvania. But the reason I set those stories up is to tell you this idea of how I've seen medicine transform itself from the 50s in Indiana, where my father would accept barter from the local farm or an Afghan from a local woman who would make it in lieu of payment. My father would never have expected somebody to lose their house over the fact they couldn't pay a surgical bill. If a farmer had to pay $50 a month forever, or my father forgave a bill, that's what people did. My father never charged another physician to be seen. He never charged a nurse. He just considered that's the way it was. And somehow I know, when we all look back through our childhoods, it's easy to look at them through rose-colored glasses and think, weren't things sweeter then? But somehow there was a fee for service that was sweeter then, before it started running out of control. And we all know the things that happened since. So in my lifetime as a young American girl, I've seen people walk on the moon. I've seen antibiotics become embraced to the point that everybody wants them even when they don't need them. My little brother had polio, and I remember lining up in the high school cafeteria when parental consent was an afterthought, and everybody got their sugar cube, and everybody got their shot, and everybody got inoculated, and everybody got sent home. And we worried as much about our communities as we did about ourselves. And then things started to happen, and I think medicine became a reflection of what was happening in our communities and nationwide. And that is, we started to think about me. Well, what about me? Not necessarily about my neighbor, but what about me? And then privacy became an issue. And then single rights became an issue, not necessarily community responsibility. And when I realized we were at a tipping point was when I was a young staff doctor at the University of California, San Francisco, and my job was at San Francisco General Hospital, one of the great hospitals in the world, where if you want to see any kind of disease from anywhere around the world, all you need to do is spend some time at San Francisco General. But I was at the General in the early 80s, when HIV went from this little report of 12 gay men with skin cancers that nobody could quite understand, to, oh my God, there's a problem with Haitians, to, oh my God, there's something we don't understand, to an acknowledgement and a scientific discovery that there was a virus that, not through incidental contact, but through the exchange of bodily fluids, was now killing people. And I was in San Francisco as this swath was cut through primarily the gay population. I attended a lot of funerals. I watched how gay men planned funerals. I learned about the celebration of life and not death. But I also learned something about physicians. And that is, when there's a fire, physicians don't necessarily run in. Now, I want to know we don't want to believe that, but here's what I saw. And it was a product of our time. HIV was not only not well understood, it was frightening. There's no cure. You're going to get it. And we didn't really know until, certainly in the early 80s, how it was transmitted. So when every patient started coming into the ER, especially those for whom there was blood splatter, and at San Francisco General there was a lot of blood splatter a lot of times, we suited up. We put on suits that were fluid impermeable, gloves, boots, hats, and masks. We looked like we belonged in outer space. And then we would touch people. And I believe that as a physician, in that moment, the physician separated him and herself from the patient population. Because what's one of the most important things that can happen between any two human beings, whether they be lovers, friends, casual acquaintances, or doctor-patient or doctor-nurse? We touch each other. We shake hands. Skin-to-skin contact is how we communicate. And certainly, if we look at the cultures of healing around the world, it's that human contact that elevates us. We know we can lower people's heart rates. We know we can make people feel good. We know we can give people better deaths, but just by holding each other's hands. But because of HIV, we ushered in the patient as vector of illness. And in so doing, we separated ourselves. I would see PR people from the public relations unit of the hospital take their skirts, open up doorknobs like this, and then let people in, even after we knew how HIV was transmitted. But that virus, more than tuberculosis, more than even polio, when we didn't understand what was going on in the 50s and 60s, transformed medicine and separated us from us and them. And I would argue that we haven't recovered. I would argue that we know a lot more about illness now than we've ever known before. But the glove situation continues. Now, I mentioned that I'm on faculty at University of Pennsylvania, and one of my jobs is to teach young surgeons how to be human beings. For those of you who have been patients recently, I'll bet that one of the first things that a physician did before touching you was to put on a pair of gloves, and then you get touched. There is no reason why latex needs to separate one human being from another. Latex has very important qualities of separating the patient from the disease-carrying physician and nurse, as well as the patient, as well as the physician who doesn't want to get hurt, from the disease-carrying patient. But those gloves are meant for procedures or putting fingers in orifices. They aren't meant to separate us. There are enough ways with alcohol wipes at every station, every hospital, to wipe down our hands and then touch each other. But that need to go back to the basics is so important. We can talk about HIPAA, we can talk about technology, which will continue to go leaps and bounds ahead of us, and all the conversations that we have to have about humanity. But we have to get back to the basics. So if we're going to talk about unraveling, one of the first things we need to do is talk about reweaving the relationship between patient and everyone else who is around him or her. 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, my parents, my mom's now 86 and my father's 90, went to get their shingle shots. My mother got hers. And my father, and you have to remember, he's a surgeon, so there's a certain amount of arrogance that goes with it. My father was pissed off that Medicare wouldn't cover a shingle shot, so he didn't get it. He just thought, damn it, it's their responsibility to cover it, and they should cover it, and though I'm not going to get it. So guess what happened? My father got shingles. My father got shingles that affected one side of his head. He got meningitis, encephalitis, went into a coma, went into that semi-permeable membrane of death, where he saw people that no one else saw, had lucid conversations with people in German and Yiddish with people who weren't there. He was a layer of a membrane from leaving this earth. And I whispered in his ear, because we've been very frank in our conversations about death and dying, Daddy, if you want to die, it's okay.